Okay, thank you very much everybody for attending today. Our speaker today is Rachael Fulton, who has an array of experience. Rachael, I'll let you kick off.
Lovely to be here, first of all, and thanks for having me. So in 2009, I graduated from my undergraduate degree in Spanish with first class honours, full of hope for the future and thinking that I would jump into a grad scheme or maybe go into the civil service. I had all these dreams and ideals, as you do. And then there was an economic crash. So there weren't any jobs. And I ended up in John Lewis Christmas team taking complaints about mince pies that weren't crumbly enough or tea bags that had burst too early and cups of tea in the Welland branch and all this sort of thing. So my dreams were slightly crushed at that point, and I did what any normal person would do and moved to Jakarta and lived in Indonesia for a year. And that is where I decided to become a journalist. So I basically was very touched by the very tricky situations that a lot of Indonesians were in. There was a lot of poverty, there were lots of human rights issues. And I thought, how can I help these people? What would be a way that I could apply my skills to help these sorts of situations? So I started writing about street children in Jakarta and sending them off to different publications, started building my portfolio. And then when I returned to Scotland, I did a master's at Glasgow Cali. And although my dreams had been to go back to Asia and work touring the world and reporting on illegal logging, I ended up in local Glasgow news, as you do, for about 2 years working in digital media, writing features, mostly about events that were going on in Glasgow or arts, things that were happening, different cultural aspects of Glasgow for the STV website. So I worked at Scottish Television. And then after a couple of years, they decided to launch a new TV channel called STV Glasgow, which is where I met the lovely Laura, who's invited me along today. And I worked at STV Glasgow for a couple of years doing absolutely everything, really. I mean, there was a comment that if they put a broom up my bum, I could clean the floors as I was going, because I was rushing about like mad, doing all different sorts of jobs. So I was researcher and runner, made the cups of tea and looked after the guests in the evening. I also produced the cookery program, Jack and Eddie's Scottish Kitchen, with Laura as director, which was a hoot, and we got lots of free food, which was nice. And I also presented the weekend program, the Roundup Show, and was a live reporter and a weather girl, even at some points, stand-in weather girl. So I had a million jobs at STV Glasgow. And then while I was working on STV Glasgow, we had a guest in called Mark Millar, who I had as a contact from a work experience placement that I'd done. I had worked for his niece at a magazine. I basically contacted the magazine and said, do you have any spaces? I'd really like to write for you. I'm really looking for work experience to build my portfolio. So they took me on as a work experience person. And it just so happened that her nephew, her uncle, was Mark Millar. So Mark Millar, as it turns out, is a big comic book writer, one of the biggest, best known comic book writers in the world, actually. I'm not a comic book person. I hadn't read a comic book actually before I met him, but he came in through my connection onto the Riverside show, which was the show that we worked on in STV Glasgow, and got chatting to him, and he was very friendly. He's really enthusiastic, really exciting sort of guy to know. And then when it came to the end of my time at STV Glasgow, I was looking for new opportunities. And to be honest, I wasn't being promoted fast enough, which we can touch upon later because it's very much linked into being female, I believe, in the industry. So I wasn't being promoted or reimbursed efficiently or sufficiently. So I decided to look for more opportunities. And he heard that I was doing this and he said, hey, well, I'm looking for an editor. Do you want to come and be my editor? And I thought, oh my God, this guy wrote Kick-Ass. He wrote Kingsman. He is responsible for some of the biggest blockbusters in Hollywood in the last few years. Do I want to be his editor? Yes, please. That would be amazing. So sorry, my dog is now going bananas for a squeaky toy. Babe, come here. Sorry, dog interruption. Yeah, so I jumped at the chance. Obviously, I went for an interview, and Bunny, come here. I went for an interview at his house. I was completely overwhelmed. I thought, I can't believe I'm having this interview to be a Hollywood writer's editor. And he hired me, and I started editing his comic book scripts, because I don't know, many of you are unlikely familiar with how comic books work, but they're written as scripts. And then you edit the scripts, make sure they all make sense. The artist draws the art based on the script. Then you edit the art. You know, if an alien is meant to look one way or have horns and he doesn't have horns, you have to go back to the artist and explain. And then you edit the colors when the colors go on. So if an alien is orange on page 2, but then purple on page 14, you have to flag that and get that fixed. So it's a very complicated job that oversaw the full production and publishing of his comic books. So I did that for a couple of years, and then, very exciting, they sold the company to Netflix, which was a huge move, because it was Netflix's first acquisition. They'd never acquired a company before. Obviously now they swallow them up all the time. You've got Shonda Rhimes and all these people who are being bought, their IPs are bought over. Bun. Their IPs are bought over, and Netflix then make content based on writers' scripts and writers' books and all that sort of thing. So I ended up working in Netflix in London for Mark, and working on all the Netflix bought IPs. So that's intellectual properties. So Kick-Ass and Kingsman were obviously already blockbuster films. So they weren't part of the Netflix deal. It was only things that hadn't been made into films and TV shows. So there I was working on treatments, I was working on scripts, I was producing, at one point I think I was doing 10 single issue comics, which are like magazines, and 4 graphic novels per month. Slightly losing my mind at points, but it was high pressure. But it was a really exciting job to do, and I loved it. And Netflix is a really great company to work for. They're genuinely brilliant. And after that, I left Netflix because I just wanted a new change of career, as I want to do after publishing. So I'd been in publishing for about 4 years, and I just felt that I wanted to be more creative in myself, because being an editor, as many of you, if you go on to be editors, will realize, is great because you are financially compensated better and you have more responsibility and you're the boss. But at the same time, you move a little bit further away from the creative part that made you sign up for these jobs in the first place. So if you're a writer, or if you're a content producer, or if you're an artist of any description, you get that little bit further away, the more important you become. So I wanted to get back to writing and creating things, which is what I love doing in television. And when I was working as a features writer, because even though you're not paid that well in the bottom rungs of TV and features writing and that sort of thing, you really love it. You know, that's your passion, and you get to be creative all the time, and you're throwing ideas around with other people. So now I am a media trainer. So I teach people how to do interviews, how to do presentations, how to give good sound bites when they're on radio or on TV. And also I'm a fiction writer. So last year I was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Audible Short Story Award, which is huge. It's the biggest short story competition in the world. The top prize is £30,000, which I really would have liked to have won, but sadly missed out on. I was in the top 6 though, so I nearly got there, close but no cigar. And I performed my story for Audible. So if you want to go and listen to me performing my story, you can, it's on Audible. So I've been focusing on that, and I have an agent off the back of that, which is really exciting. So I've written my short story collection, and we're hoping to sell a short story collection and a novel, but for that I need to write the novel, which takes a little bit longer than I was hoping. So that's where I'm at just now. And yeah, I think I've had a very zigzag, eclectic career, which is really suited to my attention span and my interests and that sort of thing. But it's maybe not the route that everyone takes. Some people just like to go into the one place and work their way up and do the same thing. But I like a little bit of variety. So that's my experience. And I'm open for any questions or anything that you guys may have.
Lovely, Rach, thank you so much. I'm going to just turn my view back to gallery mode so that we can listen in. So we do have questions. We have set questions that we've got staple questions, basically, Rachel, that we're asking all our speakers, that so at the end of the year we can sort of collate everybody's responses, but obviously we will have other questions as well. So Gemma's got our first question.
Sorry,
Gemma TV.
Okay, I'll be Gem and that'll be Gemma.
Cool.
Sorry about that.
Hiya, my first question is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self at the start of your career?
So easy to give yourself advice when you're older to your younger self because you've learned so much. And I would say have more faith in your abilities and don't let old men talk down to you, which is honestly so rife in everyone's career, but particularly the media. I think it can be quite a toxic environment sometimes. There's hopefully now your generation, you won't see it as much, but there was definitely some old ghosts still hanging around when I first started out. You know, I remember being told to be more thick-skinned and you have to be really thick-skinned to be a journalist and be in this game. And actually you can be, you know, you can be full of empathy and sensitive, and actually that can make you a better journalist and a better human being, I think. And some of the times I was, you know, talked down to or told off, or, you know, some comments were made that I thought were completely inappropriate and I didn't stick up for myself. I wish I could go back and just march my little self to HR and tell on them. So I think if I could go back, I would say just stick up for yourself and don't let what other people say about you define you. And not everyone, I know I'm imparting advice right now, but you know, people will give you advice all of the time. That doesn't mean that they're all right, you know? And I think that a lot of particularly the print media guys, when I first started out, were very much like, journalism's dead and there's no point joining it. And why are you even getting a career in this industry? And I've had an absolutely fantastic career in this industry. If I'd listened to those guys and genuinely believed them and thought, well, there's no point me continuing because there's nothing happening in journalism anymore, then I would never have had all the wonderful experiences that I've had. So yeah, can I say, don't listen too much to old guys? Is that my...
You can say that here, Rich. Thank you. Karen, you have got our second question.
Hi. Have you ever had imposter syndrome? And if so, how did it affect you and how did you address it?
So, I mean, I get imposter syndrome all the time, and I think people that say they don't are either lying or sociopaths. But I even had imposter syndrome waking up this morning. I was like, I'm talking to all these students today. I wonder what it is I have to say and why am I qualified? But my main imposter syndrome came when I was working for the comics, because I hadn't been a comics fan. And there are so many diehard comic book fans out there, you know, they can tell you that issue 432 of Spider-Man, this happens. And I just didn't have that knowledge base. So I did feel a lot like, oh, why me? And why am I in this position? But the reality is, if you have been hired, then someone with more experience and knowledge than you in that field thinks that you're the gal for the job. And I think that should be of great comfort. And also when you get someone reacting to the work you're doing. So if you're putting stuff out there that people are passionate and joyful about, then that should be a comfort to you and make you realize that, yes, everyone makes mistakes. Typos will get through, much as they keep me up at night. It will happen. But if the end result is giving people happiness, then you should feel reassured by that. And I think one of the main issues that I had was I wanted to be perfect. And that comes with being an editor as well. And I beat myself up so much about not getting everything perfect all of the time. And there's a really great Twitter thread, if you're on Twitter, about people's biggest job fails. And there were so many times that I would return to that thread to comfort myself, because there was a guy who had put the wrong number in a spreadsheet and ended up drilling $8 million worth of oil that wasn't in the right spot in the center of the ocean. And so if I got a typo or something that went through, or if I'd made a tiny mistake, I'd always refer back to that guy's story and think, okay, nobody died. I'm not a brain surgeon. You know, these things happen. And I think that really helps with imposter syndrome as well. Everyone is just trying their best all of the time.
Lovely, wise words indeed. Casey has got our third question.
My question is, if you were to recruit an intern or an employee, what would be the key criteria you would look for?
So helpful is always great. Helpful and friendly is so important, because I know that I have got most of my jobs just by being friendly and enthusiastic and, you know, trying to make people like me when I meet them. And that's what people remember. They don't necessarily remember how great, fun. They don't necessarily remember how great the cup of tea you made them was, or how great the report was, or whatever. They remember that you were a good person that was really keen to work. That being said, I would also say, when you're going for work experience and internships and things, sorry, I'm just going to get the dog. Bunny, come here. When you're going for internships and things, don't spread yourself too thin and do too much. I would say that even in paid work, in my experience, I was so eager to please and so eager to be promoted, and really wanted to get the most out of things and make sure everyone knew that I could do everything all of the time. And the reality is that's not sustainable. And there's a thin tightrope between being useful and doing your best at work experience and being exploited. So I would be very careful about how you manage how much you can do for the people that you're working for. I looked at a couple of jobs today and they were asking for huge amounts of experience, and they wanted you to be a features writer and a columnist, and there was no financial compensation for it. It was all just exposure. And I would be very, very careful of that, because exposure doesn't pay the bills. So I would say be friendly and enthusiastic, but don't let yourself get taken advantage of.
Good advice. Lisette has our fourth question.
What would you like to see changed in your profession that would improve career opportunities for women, and how would you support other women?
So that's a really good question, because the supporting other women part can be quite, careful what I'm going to say here, can be quite difficult in some organizations, because there's a culture of internalized misogyny. So even though there are women in positions of power, they've had to go through years and years of this sort of macho culture where they are sort of just gradually taught that what men have to say is more important. I'm not speaking about any particular organization there, but I do think it exists in many. So what happens then is that your role models are female role models, but they're not necessarily helpful female role models. And I think that is something that should change with immediate effect. And it lies within you guys as much as it does the people who are older and more experienced than you are, because you get the opportunity to nurture new talent and to support women that are coming up after you. So I think it would be great to see some proper supportive female role models sort of created who can support younger people and really put women's voices and women's experience and women's talent forward. And that's beyond just like, you know, hiring someone who's a girl to come and do a particular job. That's about having mentorship programs. It's about, you know, finding out what it is that matters to women in the workplace, if they feel comfortable, how they could achieve more, you know, really nurturing talent to get the most out of it. So that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see more prominent female role models who weren't still skewed towards men getting the better jobs. I would like to see it be, you know, less about how you looked and more about what you could contribute. And also just, yeah, more equality across the board, really, more women in positions of power, decision makers. And yeah, everything just a bit less pale, stale and male, as they say.
Oh, I love it. Okay, Jem in radio has our final bank question before we open it up to other questions.
Again, thank you. You've done great speaking. For our last question, what's been your proudest achievement throughout your whole career, you would say, up to this moment?
My proudest achievement, so it is the Sunday Times shortlist, just because it's such a massive international competition, and it's something that I did from my own talent. It's a story that was completely plucked out of my head during the pandemic, and there was no editing process on it. So it was just completely raw me. I didn't have an agent at the time. And I'd say that was definitely my proudest moment on a personal level. Bunny, this dog, sorry. Before the other questions, I'll give her some treats so that she can stop this. So that on a personal level, that is something that's really just was truly 100% me. So I'm really, really proud of that. Bun, come here. I'm not proud of having bought a cockapoo in lockdown. And if you're thinking about buying a cockapoo, this is your tip not to get one. But also on a professional level, I am very, very proud of the work we did at STV Glasgow. And actually, I was thinking about working with Laura this morning when I was thinking about what I was going to say. And I remember very vividly trying to memorize my script rather than read the auto cue for my What's On guide, which was a 1-minute event guide that I did on STV Glasgow. And I had Laura in my ear while I tried to rattle off what I thought I'd remembered. And I remember getting it wrong and just bursting into tears, being like, oh no, I can't do it. So I think not that moment was my proudest moment, but learning to do it properly, learning to read an auto cue, learning to overcome all my demons and fears to stand in front of a TV camera and do a live report. All of that makes me very, very proud, because I wasn't naturally confident enough to do it. I wasn't naturally sure enough of myself to be on television. I didn't think I looked nice. I didn't think my voice was any good. All of these things, this constant like critical narrative in my head, but I overcame all of those things in order to present a show and live report and do the weather. And so that on a professional level is probably my proudest achievement.